Just a second. I think we might be there.
Yay.
Just a second. I think we might.
Yes, we are.
Okay, fantastic. That was a bit of a technical fun fest, but welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So yeah, just to introduce you to who we are and what we're doing here. So yeah, so I'm Gwyneth Jones and I work as a facilitator and guide of the work that reconnects, and I coach people around all kinds of topics, but mainly focusing on, how do we stay whole and aligned with the soul during the times that we're living in. And yeah, I also write and podcast and work as a communications officer for a local community climate action project. And I'm joined tonight by Matthew Painton, who is a deep adaptation coach. So he specializes in guiding people through the emotional and psychological challenges associated with collapse awareness. And he's a co-founder and very active member of the deep adaptation community as well. So hi, Matthew.
Hello.
Hello. Do you want to say a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Okay. I've been coaching for about 15 years. I love it more than anything else in the world. But about, I don't know, 2018, 2019, I had a bit of a crisis, a mini breakdown, a period of extreme anxiety about the state of the world. And part of that anxiety was realizing I could no longer coach in the way that I had been. Helping people lead better lives in a dysfunctional world was no longer cutting it for me. And realizing that I didn't have the skills to coach what was needed or accompany people with what was needed and what I was experiencing. So I found my way to the Deep Adaptation Forum and community practice of facilitators and guides and practitioners. And together we upskill and co-learn how to hold space for these really difficult issues.
Yeah, and I found you when I decided to search whether there was such a thing as a deep adaptation coach in the world, and I found you on LinkedIn and said, hey, would you like to have a chat? And that was 5 years ago, can you believe? So
yes. Yeah.
During the pandemic, when making friends on the internet was cool again.
Yes.
And we've run many workshops together, actually, haven't we? We've done a lot around, we had Islands of Coherence, which was a regular kind of sharing space for making sense of this world we're in. And we've also done a lot of work that reconnects workshops together. So yeah, can I ask you to say a bit more about that? So what you were saying about, how you were struggling with coaching in business as usual. Yeah, like what was that process, and how did the words deep adaptation coach sort of come to you?
So the levels of anxiety and distress I was feeling at that time, it was like a scream in my body. And to a certain extent, I've always been crisis aware, ever since a young boy, but at that time it just really overwhelmed me. And I read the Deep Adaptation paper by Jen Bendell, which really made the case that it's too late for the sustainability narrative, no matter how well-intentioned, that's sort of somewhat naive given the cluster of problems, existential risks and problems that we're now looking at. Yeah, so I didn't have the skills at that time to accompany people like me who were feeling that level of distress. and I needed the support and the cooperation and the collaboration of other people to sort of upskill and enrich my practice. So I still do coaching and group facilitation, but I think a better word is accompaniment in some ways than coaching. Coaching has that sort of implication of being more successful. And I accompany people as they journey through their process of becoming aware of the scope, scale, momentum, and trajectory of the planetary crisis, and seek to sort of know what to do, really, find what's ours to do.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation tonight was for us to discuss, what are the impacts of living in these times on us, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. And can, traditional modalities of coaching and therapy and psychology, can they live up to that at all? And I know there's quite a lot of good work being done around those questions at the moment. And I just wanted to, for us to contribute to that, really. So it's not just for those who are working as coaches and therapists. I think, this sort of distress is only going to get more and more common, right? Whether you're trying to be, I don't know, a parent, a friend, you're working in a company with other people, managing people or not, whatever it is, the closer collapse comes to knocking on our door, the less we can escape it. So I'm guessing a lot of people who are actually watching this tonight are a little bit more aware of what we mean when we say metacrisis. But should we define some of those terms just to start with? So what are we on about when we say metacrisis distress?
Yeah. Shall I show some slides?
Let's do it. So we're looking at how does collapse, whatever we want to call it, actually, it's all those things, isn't it? Climate anxiety, fascism, everything going on in the world together. How does it affect us? And you've got some slides. I should say Matthew has spent, I think, years working on a lot of very complex theories really around this, trying to really pin it down. And I really wanted to, help spread that. So please do share some slides.
Okay. So hopefully you can see that. So this is what I mean by deep adaptation. Adaptation is something that all organisms are doing all of the time. And it's complex. It's reality is always changing. There's always threats. There's always opportunities. So adaptation is the creative edge of change and how organisms, but and it involves these different aspects: information processing, taking signals from the world, from the external world and the internal world, metabolizing those signals, and then finding the motivation to do something. So all animals are involved in niche construction, habitat modification, all that kind of thing. Deep adaptation is information processing about the actual state of the world. And the science is clear that we're in a clusterfuck of problems. So information processing is problematic because the information ecosystem that we exist in is full of disinformation, misinformation, spin, conspiracy, lies. And few of us can read scientific papers. So we have to trust someone to interpret, help us interpret reality. And when we look at the large picture, that the information provokes a lot of distress. And metabolization, we don't just do it in the brain processing information. Our whole body is a sense-making organism, and feelings are very much a part of adaptation and sense-making. So the idea is, how can we metabolize this information so it changes us, and we can transform at least some of the distress into wise action. Wise action is usually community building of some kind, whether it's a garden, a family, a neighborhood, a business. And all of this in the Deep Adaptation Network, we're dedicated to enabling loving and collaborative responses. So these are different aspects of deep adaptation. This is education, for one thing, and processing the information and interpreting it. In deep adaptation, we interpret present reality as in collapse. You can call it predicament, metacrisis, polycrisis, etc. But
and you said to me there was a slight difference between metacrisis and polycrisis, right? Because I thought, oh, these terms are sort of being used interchangeably to say there's a lot of stuff going on all at once. But you said there's a slight difference.
Yeah, I can show that with the next slide.
Oh, how convenient. Okay.
This is what I would call the polycrisis view, or the objective frame. Objectively, we're saying, whether you believe in it, whether you're aware in it, we're already in civilizational overshoot. That civilization can no longer be accommodated by the planet. It's carbon-fueled acceleration has already exhausted the biosphere. So the biosphere can't maintain the benign conditions of the Holocene. And we're disrupting the geosphere, the ocean currents, the ice caps, the composition of the atmosphere. So that creates planetary-wide systemic stresses. And this is objectively true, whether or not you believe in it, whether or not you can metabolize it, whether or not you're oblivious. But the objectivity tends to break things down into parts, so that we have defined problems. There's climate change, there's ocean acidification, so that many problems, which may be interrelated, but it's kind of what the objective way is to break it down into many problems.
And at the moment as well, of course, we're seeing a lot of problems that don't seem obviously linked to the climate crisis, but might still be woven in, right? Because we're seeing sort of what's happening in the US. Like, is it because, they're desperately trying to make sure they've got land that will be habitable during climate change, aka Greenland, Canada? Is it a scramble for resources, or is it's more, I think when you say civilizational overshoot, it's like that colonial capitalist worldview, isn't it, that's gone gone crazy, basically. Yeah.
That's doubling down on the insanity, basically.
Yeah,
that's what we can expect. So this next slide is what I call the metacrisis view, which includes me and you and us and our experience of the crisis. So the first thing I ask people is, what's it like to be a human situated in a planetary crisis? How are these systemic stresses showing up in your life? Whether or not we understand the causes and the bigger picture, these systemic stresses are showing up in everybody's experience now. So metacrisis is the objective factual situation plus our experience of it.
Yeah, so we're in it, we can't escape it, and it's not just it's not a case of, oh, why are you bothered by things happening over there? But it's actually like you can't get out of it. You're going to be, or you are currently being affected by it too. Yeah.
Exactly. Whether or not we understand the larger scale causes, the stresses are showing up all around us.
Yes. And I think that's a thing that I think about quite a lot is, a lot of the problems people have, even if they're not talking about the climate emergency or about capitalism, a lot of the problems stem from that anyway, whether they realize it or not, right? Like the exhaustion of trying to keep a roof over your head, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So rather than telling people why they're feeling distressed, asking them how's it showing up for you.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah,
is a better
exactly.
way.
I should probably just clarify when I say capitalism as well. I'm sort of referring to how Joanna Macy refers to the industrial growth society, right? And it's the worldview based on endless growth, endless extraction on a finite planet. That
Yes.
mindset. Yeah.
And that's what civilizational overshoot. I think of it like the cartoon character that runs off the edge of the cliff, and for a moment it's sort of paddling before it
Yeah.
realizes and falls to the ground. That's
That's where we are
civilizational
now.
overshoot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So,
So bigger than self-distress is the catch-all term for the many kinds of all the ways that these stresses are showing up in personal experience. So people are probably familiar with eco-anxiety. It's a novel phenomena recently been described by practitioners and psychologists. A lot of people are feeling eco-anxiety, but there's much more to it than that. You know, there's all kinds of distress. And when we do our deeper dive in our course, we can look a lot more into the different kinds of phenomena of stress that are showing up.
exactly, yeah. So I was going to say, for those who are watching now, if you've got the chat option on the top right of the page on YouTube, it'd be great if you just say a hello and let us know where you're joining us from today. Just, I can see 15 people are apparently watching right now.
Hey.
Hello. It'd be great to see who's here. So yeah, Matthew and I will be running a workshop on the 16th of June to, so you can get a bit more hands-on experience using some of these tools, looking at ways that you can maybe work with clients who are experiencing this metacrisis distress. So yeah, Matthew, before we go forward, we say distress, we've used the word anxiety, we've used the word distress, but what else can it feel like? Because I know for me, I sort of just oscillate all the time between like extreme rage, feeling really sick to my stomach when I see some things, feeling, I think, guilty for taking part in this, so-called civilization. And then sometimes I feel hopeful, and other times it just all seems completely pointless. So yeah, what do you see in the people you work with?
Yeah, and in my own experience, I go through every stage of weather in a single day. Fear, guilt, grief, anxiety, resentment, blame, shame, terror. Those are all elements of bigger than self-distress when we realize how serious things are.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
Yes.
And if I can show the next slide,
Yeah.
this is a sort of more complex version of that. Most of us in the global north are obliged to function in business as usual, no matter how insane it is or malfunctioning. We're obliged to make a living, to participate. Business as usual is in deep denial about the scope, scale, gravity of the planetary crisis. So in order to function, most of us either suppress or dissociate from the distress. So we can't respond. And you, me, and everyone we know is in some level of cognitive dissonance between what we intuit, what we feel, what we suspect, what we fear, and the conversations we're actually having with our partners, with our family, with our colleagues. So the sort of coaching and facilitator, one way of looking at it, one aspect of it is trying to reduce this cognitive dissonance through metabolization practices, which is sharing the grief, sharing the pain, sharing the fear, but also practices of nature connection, of mindfulness, of whatever it takes to be able to process these feelings.
Yes, because I've got a lot of questions that, I think we'll come to either now or on the 16th of June. But I think often when people see this for the first time, they think, okay, what's the goal here with this kind of work, right? So if a client comes to you, obviously in regular coaching, you set goals together, you look at, okay, by session 6, this will be the reality, you'll have achieved ABC. And obviously, I like to remind people no one's ever successfully navigated an apocalypse before, so nobody can really know where
That's
we're
right.
heading, right?
And it's good to mention that, the not knowing.
Yeah.
I've been at this for years and I'm still inadequate to the task, still full of not knowing and doubt. No one knows how to navigate a planetary crisis.
Yeah.
But that, if we look at the next slide, we're better off in community, what you and I called islands of coherence, resilient communities and networks. And it's like the metabolization work of the bigger than self distress is the logjam in all this. We can't have these resilient adaptive communities if we're all sitting on unmetabolized distress. It just blows up. So in community, we have more agency, more understanding, more reach, bigger containers to metabolize the distress. And when we remember who we are, what really matters, and act on behalf of what we love together with solidarity, with mutuality, we can transmute at least some of that distress into more than me enlivenment, acting on behalf of what we love.
Can we unshare the slides for a second and then come back
Yes.
to them? Because I think, I'd like to just
That's enough. Yes.
I just want to take a couple of steps back, just in case, if we can. Firstly, I've got some people who have said where they are, which is great. So we've got Phoenix, Arizona, 2 Scottish artists currently in Greece. We've got someone said the cartoon character is Wile E. Coyote. They both live in my neighborhood. So someone who's wherever Wile E. Coyote hangs out. We've got Cardigan. Is that Wales? Yes. We've got Prague, Connecticut, and Barnegat, New Jersey. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. And feel free to drop some questions in there too. We'll get to them a bit later on. But if you want to type them ahead of time, do feel free. So Matthew, I just was going to backpedal a little bit because some people might not know that there is even an option of seeking, a climate aware or a collapse aware coach or therapist, right? So if somebody is feeling distressed about what's happening in the world, what do they do? And I know often people might just go to a regular therapist or coach. And I've heard so many horror stories of people being gaslit essentially and told, oh, well, you're obviously catastrophizing, things aren't really that bad. Or, Joanna Macy's famous story where her therapist tried to tell her that her fear of the bulldozers cutting down the forest was a projected fear of her own libido. I hope we're not still that bad, but you never know. So I suppose I want to ask, what would a sort of therapy or coaching as usual look like? What should people look for? And I suppose what are the limitations of one-to-one work maybe anyway?
Well, the wellness industry of all its stripes, therapy, coaching, are just as much in denial as every other sector of society on the whole. And there's this sort of contract that I'll give you my scarce money in return for tangible benefits to me and a better functioning in this reality. So the systemic stresses tend to get left at the door. The practitioners won't mention it unless the clients ask for it. And when they do, and if the therapist or facilitator hasn't dealt with their own, metabolized their own distress and understood the bigger picture, then they're going to dismiss or undermine or belittle, maybe in subtle ways. So one of the things I did in the Deep Adaptation Forum was create a database of collapse-aware practitioners. And often, once you've accepted the large-scale picture, it's not necessarily what we're talking about in the space. It's always personal. What am I going to do? What's mine to do? But the space that we hold is permeable to these bigger issues, so they're not undermined, not left at the door.
Yeah, and I think that's just so important because you might not want to spend every session talking about collapse or about climate, but knowing it's welcome in the space, knowing that it's not going to be sort of seen as irrelevant to what you're bringing. That's the start, isn't it?
And I host Collapse Club, I host Deep Listening, which are circling, and so many people report the relief of being able to say what they feel, what they fear, what they're angry about, without judgment.
Yeah,
just to sort of let that out is a huge deal for a lot of people, especially when we can't talk to even our closest loved ones about it.
that's what I find so often is that people who come to my facilitated spaces, so often it's the work that reconnects or grief circles, or you and I did our Islands of Coherence, right? It's almost a double trauma, isn't it? Okay, knowing how bad everything that's going on in the world is the first, but then feeling like the closest people to you don't seem to really get it or care, and that they kind of maybe mock you or look at you a bit weird because you're bringing it up. That's, I think, in many ways much more traumatic because we're wired to belong, aren't we, and be accepted. Yeah. So about the group work then, so the sharing circles or sense making circles or grief circles, I suppose, how is that different from working one-to-one with somebody? Because we're not going to say one way is better, obviously, are we? Because it depends on the person and
absolutely
what they prefer. But what
But
do you find?
I don't hardly have the language to describe it, but there's a co-processing that goes on when people are able to share without being interrupted, not entering into debate, not having to justify their perspective, but just being able to share how they're experiencing this. Then very often what somebody else has said, it's like nails what you're feeling. I could have said that. And there's this, and you get different perspectives on it. You get different, people are looking at different levels, at the big scale, at the deeply personal, the different kinds of distress, giving a name to it. I'm grieving for the flowers because they're going extinct, or whatever it is. And this co-processing, so it's a bigger container and a richer container to sort of express and metabolize.
Yeah, no, I like that you use the word metabolize a lot. So processing those feelings, right? Because sometimes I think I've got to step back even further and say it's never about eliminating distress or the negative emotions, right? We often say, well, what you're feeling, if you feel grief or rage or fear, or let's go stronger, terror, you're having a normal reaction to what's happening to the planet that keeps us alive. If you're not worried, that's probably the more worrying thing, really. But it's about being able to continue on in some way, isn't it? But we're not saying we need to fix the bad feelings and go back to business as usual, because that's often what a lot of therapy and coaching might angle towards. I mean, not all, of course, but that might be sometimes the underlying assumption that you need to sort of move through your grief and go back to work.
Yeah.
So what's the is there an outcome we aim for here, or is it just about being more alive in our hearts and souls?
Yeah, there's lots there. The psychic energy involved in suppressing and dissociating from reality and from our own feelings means we're cut in half just to begin with. In a well-held space where you can metabolize those dark feelings, there is an enlivenment that comes with that. And that's mysterious, if you like. That's sacred alchemy. You know, there are some very good grief practitioners around, and they all describe that, you know, grief is a river, it has to flow, and it's enlivening when we do. We remember what we love and who we really are. And then most of us are, you know, modernity corrals us into hyper-individualism. We're very vulnerable as individuals to misinformation, disinformation, overwhelm, dissociation. When we are able to metabolize these bigger than self distress, we are better able to collaborate and cooperate with other people. So in deep adaptation, we try to disseminate the space holding skills that we need. It's not just about, you know, there's a much more of a community focus on all this. We're just better off in community. And if we can find ourselves, whether it's a virtual community that are collapse aware or crisis aware, or however you like to call it, we're just better off. Our resilience is massively enhanced.
Yeah, let's come to this word community then, because I would say I've worked with you as a client as well, right? And I've found some great things in there that I'll come back to. But then also, I've worked with people as coach or guide or whatever word we want to use. And I found that can be very powerful. But then the magic of a group is something completely different again, isn't it? As you said, it's sort of something bigger emerges from it. And because most of us are raised in hyper individualism, we don't know how to be in community.
Right.
And it does make me quite sad that we, you know, on the one hand, the amazing thing about the internet is we can find communities of people who feel the way we do. And I don't know where I'd be without that, right? Without realizing that I can meet amazing people all over the world who feel the way I do about the Metacrisis. On the other hand, yeah, it makes me sad that we sort of feel we have to do that rather than having the conversations with the people who are geographically around us. But let's be honest, are the people we're going to be stuck with if collapse does mean no more internet.
Well,
so
right.
so yeah, coming to that word community, what do you mean when you say it? And if you want to open your slide again, because I know you had a bit there about community, maybe we can go into more of what that means.
Well, there are, you know, humans are very social animals, very collaborative. You know, modernity has, like we say, corralled us into this hyper individualism. But a community can be a garden, a family, place of work. But if we're all sitting on unmetabolized distress, then it's going to erupt. You know, it erupts in conflict, erupts in disagreement. These communities of resilience aren't going to save the day. We're not naively saying that, you know, we're going to avoid what's coming, but it's just that we're better off in community. And if we're sitting on an unmetabolized distress, that's much harder. So in deep adaptation, we focused on the metabolization practices, the circling, especially ways to be with each other in real time and not be reactive. More and more people are seeking to create local groups. You know, but there's groups all over the planet that are responding to this. You know, it's not rocket science, really. But if we can do the work, whether it's personally or in a group, of getting to grips with this distress, that's the best that we can do, and it's inherently worthwhile. You know, whether or not, you know, whatever transpires. Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I like, to come back to this comment, it's inherently worthwhile, right? And that's, again, that's what makes it different from sort of regular coaching, that we're not saying it's only worth doing anything if we can save the world and stop catastrophe. It's a much deeper sort of soul work, isn't it? It's about,
Exactly. If we could,
what was it? The work around hospicing modernity and all of that. We're kind of putting this very destructive way of life to rest. And then, Joanna Macy says, we don't know if we're in the death throes of life on Earth or if we're birthing a new life-sustaining civilization. But
exactly.
either way, the task is the same, she says, which is to be
Yeah.
fully present.
There's another way of kind of representing that. This bigger than self-distress and more than me enlivenment. We can't be distressed and enlivened at the same time. It's a kind of an either or. When we're distressed, we're aware of the threat landscape, all the problems, issues, concerns, and it tends to narrow our focus. We become hyper vigilant, activated to deal with these distresses. We don't want to spend the rest of our lives in permanent, perpetual distress. So the sort of, I call it the sacred alchemy, is transmuting that distress into more than me enlivenment. That's not naive, let's save the planet. It's too late for that. It's what's mine to do? How can I act on behalf of what I love in ways that are meaningful, worthwhile? Yeah. So there's a sort of narrative story. We start off with business as usual. Something happens, triggers our distress. We become aware of the scope, scale, gravity of the planetary crisis. And then through these practices and processes, we can transmute at least some of that distress into acting on behalf of the good, the beautiful, the true, the wise.
I think it's really pertinent that Joanna Macy's book on the work that reconnects is called Coming Back to Life, right? Because she also talks about how when we block feelings such as grief and fear and rage, we're also blocking our capacity for joy and presence and aliveness. So it's almost doing that emotional work, and it's not a one-time thing, is it? It's an ongoing process. You don't just do a grief circle and go, right, that's it, I've processed my grief.
Exactly. Yeah. And Joanna's book with Chris Johnson, Active Hope, sort of saying that, hope doesn't arrive on golden wings to save the day and save the planet. Hope is generated by what we do.
Yeah, that's the difference, isn't it, between active hope and passive hope, waiting for the prince on a white horse to come and save the day. We are that prince, and we might not be saving the day, but we are at least making the world a little bit better in the meantime. I don't know. I was always really inspired by Doctor Who, because the Doctor in one scene, he says he can't change what happened in history, but he can save one person. And it's always worth it if you could save one person. And I'm not saying we necessarily save a person, but it's like that poem, on the last day of the world I would plant a tree. It's continuing, isn't it, to not give up and say, oh well, we're screwed, I'll just dissociate and not do anything. It's
yeah.
Well, what about for you personally? How do you live this?
Good question. I find the spaces I facilitate and host and the coaching work I do enlivening, despite the subject matter. The the wisdom, the connection, the understanding that shows up in the space is beautiful. I notice I cycle through anxiety, despair, depression, and then enlivenment and expectation and hope, all in a day, over a month, and I think that's part of the work, is to speed up that process of enlivenment and despair, and but nature connection, photography, I do what I can, mindfulness practices, connection with other people, it's still all the things that bring us joy.
Yeah, I was just going to throw in that Francis Weller quote, where he says, "The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them."
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's very different from the sort of wellness industry messaging, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Really, I don't know, sits in a different place within me. Because, yeah, we as people who are enlivened by doing this work, by holding spaces for people, by helping other people metabolize it. I did sort of write in the description for this, how do we support others without burning out or bypassing? So this is an interesting one to think about. Bypassing being that sort of spiritual bypassing, right? So saying, oh, well, it'll all be okay because, reality is an illusion anyway, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I suppose what advice would we give to others who want to do this work, and hold that space for other people?
Remembering who we really are, what brings us joy, and acting on behalf of that. One of the things that really enlivens me is cosmology. The James Webb Telescope, looking back in time. We live in this wonderful and amazing unfolding and unfurling universe. I practice through Wider Embraces, a meditation practice that I also offer online, connecting with that larger being, resourcing ourselves in the unbroken, the world of spirit, the world of the cosmos. The universe isn't having a crisis, it's still unfolding in glorious and wonderful ways. So I make an effort to connect with that larger being. And for some people that's spiritual, for some people it's religious. But that's a tremendous resource to help us navigate all this.
Yeah, it's important to be aware, isn't it, how much the dominant culture that we've been steeped in and grown up in, how much it separates us from the soul and from the wider web of life and from our ancestors and the wider cosmology beyond the earth, like all those things. I mean, I feel that most people still are very drawn to those things, whether consciously or unconsciously, right? There's still a fascination with
Absolutely.
Pets or having pets, or looking at pretty pictures of nature, or traveling even. I think that's another aspect of it, right? It's expanding beyond the mundane and the self and the everyday, and it's also, yeah, like spiritual is like the best word we have for it in English. And I imagine if we spoke to Indigenous people with their own languages, they'd actually have a lot more language to even describe what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's part of it too, isn't it? It's honoring the teachings of Indigenous people without appropriating, which I think is really difficult because that's so wired into our brains from how we've been brought up in this culture of exploiting and taking and selfishness. But I do think,
that objective frame of mind as well, that objectivity and scientific reductionism, we've done marvelous things with it, It's an amazing way of understanding the world, but it's partial. By design, it excludes subjective experience, and it can't explain subjective experience, you know, and it's we've all got skin in the games. We're all an expression of the whole of the planet, and that's been trained out of us, and that's very much part of the problem. So it's not that we're rejecting science, we rely on science, but it's a very partial way of understanding reality, and it's created as many problems as it's solved when we exclusively look at reality through that lens.
Yeah, and I think especially because nobody is really capable of being totally objective, are they? So a lot of science has been pushed by a certain type of ego, a certain type of person as well. And you know, because indigenous people have been saying for centuries things that now Western science has confirmed, right? And it's like, okay, science has been happening for millennia. It's just it wasn't in a form that was deemed acceptable to colonialists.
Exactly.
So yeah, I feel like what alivens me in the work is that shifting consciousness. And I liked Kristen in the chat has also said, I'm new to the coaching space and have been really called to do work specifically in the space of reconnection to what truly matters: self, others, planet, and spirit. Work that is related to Gaia consciousness and shifting our worldview and values in support of the Great Turning. Have no idea what to call myself or the type of coaching I do. Yes, welcome to the club, Kristen. It's very hard, isn't it? Because the paradigm we live in says you've got to have a catchy title, a catchy little Instagram summary of what you do. And I suppose what we're really doing is some sort of soul alchemy. But God, to me, that just sounds so pretentious. I don't think I could put it as my name. But yeah, it's sort of, in a way, what we
do. The deep adaptation guidance site, which I helped develop and now sort of manage, if there are practitioners in the room, so to speak, have a look at that site. There's lots of people describing what their offering is that's collapse aware or crisis aware, and lots of different modalities and the ways of expressing that.
It's a very emerging thing, isn't it? It's very pioneering. I've been following Steffi Bednarek's work as well on, you know, how do we adapt coaching and therapy to the challenges of the metacrisis. She's also talking a lot about bringing back the role of imagination, talking a lot about indigenous ways of thinking. It's really, really worth looking. She had Frances Weller and also talking about grief, right? And I think they've got a course at the moment around that. So yeah, we've mentioned these sort of soul-centered approaches. We've mentioned groups, community, I think embodiment as well, right? More of a sort of somatic focus. Yeah, what else are we missing in the ways that this kind of work needs to adapt, I suppose, to face the crises we're facing?
Well, as a something about the client-centered approach that sort of there's a rule in coaching and therapy that you keep yourself apart, that you're client-centered, and it's what their concerns, their issues, their process. I found, as setting my stall out as a collapse-aware coach, people really appreciate my struggle, to know that I'm going through, I'm in there with it as well, and there's, you know, that I don't, yeah. So there's something about bringing yourself more into the room. I remember talking to coaches years ago, and they're saying, "Well, you can't bring your agenda into the space," and not bringing these issues into the space is an agenda, you know. So learning how to do that. You know, as a coach, I'm still centered on the client, but my there's more of me in the room as well, and my process and struggle and not knowing, and you know, all of that comes into the room and is appreciated.
Is it? I'm just going to ask what I imagine some people might think then. Is there a risk the client will feel that they have to now hold space for you if you're also showing that you're distressed by everything that's happening in the world?
Well, that's the art and skill. You know, I was very well trained in not doing that.
Yeah.
So I use it judiciously. You know, I set my stall out as a collapse aware coach, so people don't come to me. You know, people that aren't becoming collapse aware don't come to me. So I'm not laying something on them that they didn't already know. I'm exploring them with with them.
Yeah. And I think that is an art, isn't it? And it is a thing that, you know, we learn through experience as well. I don't know, that fine line where you're showing the person, like, I'm in this too. I'm also really worried about everything happening in the world, but also I'm not telling you that in a way where, you know, you now have to listen to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that fine
Yeah. That's
balance.
why I'm kind of more comfortable with the term accompaniment,
Mm-hmm.
the coaching. But if I put that on my website, nobody know what I mean. But um, yeah, the resonance of the word is more appropriate to what I do, I think. You know, deep
Yes.
accompaniment.
Yeah, it's accompanying somebody through the mud or the fog or whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
don't actually know what's on the other side of that mud either. So, yeah. And I think the importance that we've done our own work, and as we said, it's not a one-time thing, it's ongoing, but that we have really been metabolizing our own metacrisis distress. I think that's just so important because I will say I've sometimes met people in this space where I sort of felt that they maybe didn't really grasp quite the enormity of the situation that we're facing in the world. You know, I've heard some comments like, oh, it won't really affect us that badly in the UK, for example. And then I think, well,
I
it's
mean,
not really the same then, is it? Working with someone who does see that.
yeah. I mean, in my experience with I'm part of the Deep Adaptation Facilitators group. We co-train each other. If we have a new offering, we can share it there first.
Mm.
You know, there's sort of supervision, if you like, or what we call intervision. So yeah, it's like continual professional development, but in this context, we co-learn, we support each other, we experiment with each other with new offerings. Yeah, so it's
Really good.
rigorous and best practice. We're evolving best practice.
Is it worth us saying a tiny bit about the deep adaptation community then? Because I know there are a lot of free offerings there, aren't there? There are, you know, circles and lots of different spaces people can come if they are new to this and want to be in community with others.
Absolutely. I mean, the free offerings, the regular offerings, death cafes, where we can just talk about death. Deep listening, where we each get an allotted time to share and can invite counsel if we want it. Wider embraces and earth lifting are sort of meditation practices, group meditation practices. Deep relating is an amazing practice that's it's kind of a meditational way of being authentic in each other's company and having a deeply embodied conversation, how to communicate in that way. Collapse Club, I also host Collapse Club, which is kind of an offshoot, but that's we look at we ask the questions: how are you feeling about collapse? How are you living in a new way? And what are you learning? Which is a great suite of questions to sort of really evoke and share wisdom and insight. So that, yes, there's lots of different offerings.
A lot going on. I've just put a link as well in the chat to that, because it is a bit overwhelming, isn't it, when you first come to the deep adaptation community? They've made a sort of tree interactive infographic now with all the different bits, but I suppose it's quite open source and flat hierarchy, so lots of different things can.
We encourage people to self-organize into
Yeah.
groups. More that's becoming local rather than just virtual. There's also a welcoming circle every month where it's for exactly that. You will be welcomed into the ecosystem and sort of pointed to the different things depending on who shows up, what they're interested in.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's great that there are so many things going on. And of course, I'm always going to plug the Work That Reconnects network as well as another space. Yeah. And well, there are more and more things like this, I think, coming up. So the Good Grief Network is another one. And I don't know, any other ones we should.
Climate Psychology Alliance, Climate Coaching Alliance.
That's
They're really good.
right. I should probably get some links into the chat while we talk.
Or you
Yeah.
can put it underneath later on.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, I'd like to encourage people to put their questions in the chat now if you've got some. And while I give a couple of minutes for that, yeah, I'll just say on the 16th of June, we are going to have a deep dive workshop. So it's aimed at, anybody who's working with people in terms of coaches, therapists, facilitators, or any other capacity where you're working with people that might be experiencing metacrisis distress. Whether we're talking, climate related or political related or all the things thrown together. But it's not just going to be us talking then, it's going to be some pretty interactive things. So it'll be an opportunity to also process some of your own metacrisis distress as well, and maybe to talk about what you're already doing and see.
That's yeah, I love that so many people are adapting their practice, and there's a lot to learn from each other and to co-learn.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't have all the answers either, but we've got what we're doing and best practice, I suppose, from our own experience and from the circles of coaches and facilitators that we work with, right? So we were also, for a couple of years, weren't we? We were regularly meeting with quite a few coaches that were working in a similar space to sort of support each other and, yeah, compare notes essentially. Because this is emerging work, like we said, nobody has navigated this sort of thing before. I mean, of course, we can say there have been plenty of people throughout history that have navigated really, really difficult times. But yeah, if we're looking at potentially like extinction level events, this is, yeah, something, as far as we know, nobody has navigated before. Maybe the dinosaurs. So
they're keeping their secrets to themselves.
they are. Yeah. So I wrote before a question, and I think we have covered it, but also just to circle back, are we helping people to do something about what's happening in the world or to accept it? Because we've heard that criticism a lot, that deep adaptation is very passive, and that's possibly even, the oil industry likes that narrative because we don't do anything then to fight them.
Yeah, the idea that accepting collapse is a capitulation or a spiral into perpetual despair is just not what happens in these spaces. That's what happens if you don't do the work of metabolizing. what's mine to do is a great question. And yeah, this point that when you remember who you really are, what really matters, what you love, and act in service of that, there's an enlivenment that happens, and that's the best we can do. It's inherently, we're not no longer trying to save the planet. We're just trying to do the best possible thing to the best possible outcomes that we can navigate towards. There's in the circles I'm in, there's a big sort of conversation about what's the difference between collapse awareness and collapse acceptance. And Karen Perry's done some really powerful work on collapse acceptance, an article, 15 benefits of collapse acceptance. I'm not quite there yet. I'm still very much in resistance a lot of the time. But yeah, if we can, it's that prayer, isn't there?
The serenity prayer.
Yes, grant me the wisdom to.
Yeah, the strength. Oh no, I forgot what it is now. But yeah, to understand, accept the things I can't change and change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah.
Exactly that. I mean, that is just so profoundly on the button. Really.
Was it you that talked about this as well? How we've got our circle of influence and our circle of care, right? That, there's a sphere around us of what we can actually affect and influence. And there's a sphere that's what we are concerned about. And I think a lot of us who find ourselves in this space, our circle of care is everything, the whole world. But
that's right.
Yeah, we don't really have, unfortunately, that influence either.
There's a terrible asymmetry between, when we care for the planet, when we care for humanity, when we care for the biosphere, as individuals, there's very little we can do to save anything. So we easily become overwhelmed and then end up doing nothing. But when we realize that we all do have profound reach with the people we love, with our colleagues at work, in our neighborhood, that's stepping into that space, we really can affect things for the better. And it's a beautiful thing to do. So yeah, it's when you're sensitized to the big scale, it is really overwhelming. I'm constantly managing my overwhelm.
Yeah,
I can't put the cork back in the bottle, sort of thing. But all the small actions, the things that we can do, that balances out that overwhelm. And
oh yeah, and I'm like you. I rage against the dying of the light. I can't really absorb that advice about only focusing on the things I can change, because there's some part of me that just refuses to accept it. And maybe that's okay. It's the stubborn optimism. But as you said, yeah, maybe, if we're too overwhelmed by everything, we'll do nothing. So that's one thing I love about the work that reconnects, is it leads us through that spiral, right? Through gratitude, honoring our pain for the world, perceiving with new and ancient eyes, and then going forth. So you do all that work before you think about, what am I actually going to do? But then the action you take isn't just coming from a sort of quick burst of fear or anger. It's coming from a more carefully considered process space.
yeah.
So, it might be that you are going to build local resilience in your neighborhood, or it might be, trying to shift some level of consciousness towards that wider Gaia consciousness. Whether or not you think that doing that is going to have, some consequences down the line, or just because it feels like the right thing to do. Yeah. But it's really hard, isn't it? Because we want to solve problems, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah. So do you want to show me the other slides you had? Seeing as no one's put a question in the chat, so we can see if there was anything else you wanted to show.
I think I've shown you all the ones I got ready.
All right, no, that's all right.
Yeah.
Great. All right, well, we can wind up in a moment then, because I think I've asked you a lot of things, and we are able to just talk forever. I think we've found we won't subject everyone else to that right now. But yeah, if you want some hands-on experience with this with us, please do come along on the 16th of June. I've put a link in there in the chat. It's the one on my website, and I'll put one in the comments below the video as well. And yeah, thank you to everyone who's joined us. I think we've still got a few people here, so yeah, thank you for being with us, and hope we'll get the chance to talk to all of you at some point if we haven't already.
Thank you, Gwyneth. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone. Just pressing end stream. Oh, there we go. I think we've